incoming chair of the council, outgoing chair, Minister for Education in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Honorable Curtis King, and other honorable ministers of education across our OECS member states. Director General of the OECS Commission, His Excellency Dr. Didicus Jules, Program Director for Education and Acting Director of Human and Social Division, Mrs. Cicera Simon, other ministry officials, permanent secretaries, etc., gathered with us this afternoon in studio. And of course, a warm welcome to those members of the media joining us online on Zoom and in-house. Other ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. No doubt it's been very interesting, very intense deliberations right here in Antigua, Barbuda. We will be taking your questions of the panel a little later in this afternoon's program. My name is Ursil Charles Jr. The questions will be fed through me. All right, we're going to ask for the closing report to be presented by the incoming chair of the council. That's Antigua Barbuda's Minister for Education, the Honorable Darrell Matthew.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to your listening and viewing audience. And a special good afternoon to all of those persons here in Antigua and Barbuda who are watching these proceedings today. I'd like to commence my closing remarks for this meeting, this Council of Ministers meeting here in Antigua Barbuda, by first of all thanking my colleague ministers for taking the time out of what is undoubtedly a busy period in their schedules to travel to Antigua and Barbuda with their respective delegations. I can say that we had quite pleased with the outcomes that I will share with you just now. I speak on behalf of the Council of Ministers of Education here in the OECS when I say that the 8th meeting of the OECS Council of Ministers of Education was held here at the Sir John E. St. Louis Finance and Conference Center on Wednesday, April 19th and Thursday, April 20th, 2023. In attendance were ministers of education, permanent secretaries, and directors from education ministries and development partners using a hybrid approach. The meeting was held under the theme, Touching Lives Through Data-Driven Development. There are major themes that evolved out of the meeting, such as the use of artificial intelligence, poor performance regionally in mathematics. There was also the theme of the strengthening of partnerships and youth engagement at the highest level of decision-making and the importance of data-driven development. The key decisions emanating from the meeting are as follows. The ministers of education agreed to the suggestion of CXC facilitating a brief presentation on the integration of artificial intelligence into the education system. The ministers supported the adoption of the OECS Child Online Protection Policy and Strategic Framework document. The ministers endorsed the OECS Digital Learning Ecosystem. The ministers endorsed the commitments on the policy paper on curriculum and assessment. The ministers agreed to establish working groups of youth to further ventilate their issues related to mathematics, with a view to arriving at solutions to the issues with mathematics in relation to students' struggles with low performance in the subject area. The ministers suggested the sharing of the best practices in early childhood education to get a better understanding of approaches employed across the OECS. The ministers of education of the OECS suggested the coordination of efforts in the area of technical and vocational education and training. Relating to partnerships, the ministers agreed to collaborate with the European Union delegation in Barbados in encouraging use of the various cooperation facilities under the new Caribbean EU partnership. As it relates to youth engagement and empowerment, ministers agreed to engage the youth more meaningfully as active contributors in the decision-making process. Additionally, ministers agreed to the inclusion of a youth representative as part of the national delegation attending future annual meetings of the Council of Ministers of Education. The ministers suggested that member states consider the formation of national student councils in countries where they do not exist, and it will also include the young delegates on the U Report platform. Finally, colleagues, the ministers agreed that the 9th Council of Ministers of Education meeting will be hosted by the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis in 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, as I'm sure you can discern from my very brief report, we had a tremendously robust exchange of thoughts, ideas. We had excellent dialogue, and we addressed some key and critical issues that we believe affect the development of our sub-region here in the OECS. I would like to use this opportunity to thank my Director General of the OECS, Dr. Didicus Jules, and his entire team for the work that they continue to do to support our individual island nations here in the OECS. I believe that I can speak on behalf of my colleague ministers when I say that they have proven to be outstanding public servants for our region as they advance the cause of this region. I said in my opening remarks a few days ago, and it seemed like a lifetime ago that we started this meeting, given the amount of work that we've done. But I said during my opening salvo that I believe and I'm confident that I can say without any fear of contradiction, the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States is a political union that has survived the test of time. And I am certain and I'm confident can be an example of a successful political union anywhere on this planet. And so on behalf of my colleague ministers, Director General, I wish to thank you and your team for the work that you do for this region, and specifically for the work that you have done in this particular instance to prepare us for this meeting, to facilitate this meeting, and to ensure that you played a meaningful role in us having a very successful meeting. Thank you very much, DG, and thank you also to my colleague ministers for the part that you continue to play in advancing education here in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Thank you. Ursula?
Thank you very much, Minister Matthew, for your comprehensive but brief report, and we do appreciate your joining your fellow ministers right here in Antigua to discuss these very important, not only policy issues, but administration issues, education issues that will affect not only us, but our children as well. My apologies. No doubt, so many questions emanating from the report. Those of us who were not present in the very high-level meetings will have a lot of questions as to how you intend to operationalize some of these things that you would have noted. We'll invite our team members online to suggest their questions as well so that we can have these asked. Allow me to just ask the first question, if you would. I remember before these meetings began, much was said about coordinating primary school curricula and not only the curricula, but testing, assessment as well. Was there anything discussed in these meetings, and perhaps how we can align those efforts, and perhaps if there was anything said about the use of technology in those discussions?
Yes, thank you. Before answering your question, allow me to express the deepest appreciation of the OECS Commission to the government of Antigua and Barbuda, and in particular to Minister Darrell, for the extraordinary hospitality that has been displayed in this meeting. In fact, Antigua and Barbuda, we owe a special debt of gratitude to them because you have actually hosted two back-to-back meetings of councils of ministers. The first was, 3 days ago, a meeting of the ministers for social development and protection, and now the ministers of education. And in all cases, we know this was a great burden to bear because of the protocols involved. We are grateful also for the members of the public putting up with the police sirens, pushing them out of the way in order to facilitate the movement of the ministers to meetings. With respect to the testing, that was a major consideration because the concern of ministers that have been regularly expressed is whether testing, the role of testing in the education system needs to be examined. And when we speak about learning, is testing being done for the sake of learning, or is it being done just simply to rank students and to promote them up the system? So a lot of effort and attention was paid to this matter. There were presentations made. CXC was present in those meetings. There was a working group established by the OECS prior to this meeting, which presented a paper to the ministers that looked in a comprehensive way at new modalities of testing, but with a real focus on what we call formative assessment, the use of the use of tests as a means of checking how learning is happening rather than just an end product to certify that you have mastered a certain body of content. And we will see that being rolled out in the education systems of the region. Already many countries are using the CXC CPEA, the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment, which is a very different paradigm from a one-shot exam. It's a process that as you teach, you get feedback from students, you provide feedback to them. All of that process, it's a process thing that contributes to the final grades of students. And so a number of recommendations have been made as to how we embed some of that methodology in education as a whole at the classroom level so that we can ensure that the process of learning is happening. Importantly, too, a lot of discussion was held by ministers relatedly on how to essentially make learning fun. Because, and what is interesting about this meeting, which is a groundbreaker for us, is that for the first time we had secondary schools and post-secondary students from every school on the island in Antigua and Barbuda present in the meeting, and they sat throughout the deliberations except for the caucus of the ministers. And the students were free to intervene in the discussions and share their point of view. Minister Darrell called on them at several points, particularly on the testing point and on this debate on the issue of mathematics, to hear from the students what their perspectives were. And it was really heartening, and one could feel justifiably proud of the Antiguan students, the maturity and the sober reflections they brought to the table, as well as some very specific recommendations that CXC is obligated to take on board, as well as the ministers in the way forward. So we are very grateful for the presence of the students, and as you would have heard from Minister Darrell, our chairman, a decision was taken by ministers that going forward, every meeting of the ministers of education will see a presence of students from across the region contributing and participating in the deliberation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jules. Allow me to ask another question in terms of the coordination of technical vocational training. I believe the minister would have spoken to that. Any idea how that would look in terms of ensuring that there is coordinated effort across the sub-region?
Well, if I may speak on behalf of my colleague ministers, it was really appreciated that technical and vocational training constitutes an important part of the educational infrastructure in our region. We have come from a culture where the academics and the traditional subject areas tended to be given priority. And as we have developed as island states, we recognize that an equal part of our attention should be given to technical and vocational training. We actually, as a team, made a visit to the Harrison Center, Antigua and Barbuda School of Continuing Education, to demonstrate to our regional colleagues what it is that we're doing here in Antigua and Barbuda and the sort of investment that we're making in TVET. There was a recognition, even prior to our site visit, that countries in our region needed to pay special attention to that area. I believe that we have identified one of the things that we could do is to recognize and to build out centers of excellence in different areas, one of which could be technical and vocational training. And Ursula, if I may be so presumptuous as to touch on another area, artificial intelligence, technology, robotics, so with St. Kitts and Nevis was identified as a possible center of excellence. But the point I would like to make is that we ought not to have to reinvent the wheel. We recognize that there is work that needs to be done to build out the TVET area, Antigua and Barbuda having invested significantly could be an area where persons in the immediate locale of Antigua and Barbuda, such as Montserrat, could attend. Each of the islands are working in their individual capacities to build out their individual centers as well. And so as it relates to a coordinated approach, there is, like I said, a recognition that it needs to be done, but each country really has its specific developmental challenges and developmental needs. And so whereas in Antigua and Barbuda, we may see an opportunity to build out our center specializing in the repair of electrical vehicles. In a country like St. Vincent and the Grenadines or Grenada, the need may be in a different area. And so it is not so much that we are coordinating programs, but rather coordinating strategies, recognizing that one of the development strategies in our region that must be employed is addressing TVET and the associated areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. It leads me to a follow-up question on that, because AI is very heavily math concentrated. And I believe that would have been one of the subjects of your discussion as well. Joining with the Ministry of Education officials here and of course your colleague ministers, any concrete plans where math is concerned and addressing those issues, because data comes from math and touching lives, math touches all of us. What concerted efforts are we going to make at this level or at other levels to address that issue?
Thank you again, Ursula. Excellent question. Decisions have to be made using data. And in our 7th meeting in St. Lucia last year, a decision was taken by the ministers to access data, anonymous data coming out of CXC, so that we could do a deep dive into that data to understand exactly what is happening with our mathematics and to understand where the particular deficiencies may be. And having had access to that information, we can now seek to put strategies in place to address them. That is one a high-level decision that was taken. I can report that that data was in fact received from the CXC director. Am I correct in saying so? Yes. And so the deep dive is now taking place into the data. I'll say, Ursula, there are no easy solutions to complex problems. And so in order to address the problem properly, we need to understand the genesis of the problem. And so that is what is being assessed now. However, notwithstanding that, we do recognize, as was mentioned earlier, that certain strategies and modalities need to be put in place to make teaching and learning fun and enjoyable. The students themselves, in their discourse with us and in their interaction with us, indicated that while at the primary school level, mathematics was in fact a fun subject and an interesting subject to be a part of, the moment you entered secondary school, the mindset changed. It became a lot more intimidating. It became a lot more difficult to grasp the concepts, perhaps due to issues of anxiety, perhaps due to how it was being conveyed to students, perhaps given the pressures that are put on students to ensure that they must pass mathematics. So when a student sits in an exam and they're told, well, it's going to be difficult for you to matriculate into university if you don't pass math. It's going to be difficult for you to gain meaningful employment if you don't pass math. It adds an extra amount of pressure, an extra dimension to the subject area on its own. One student mentioned directly to CXC, in fact, that one of the strategies that they were happy to see being employed by CXC was something as simple as to separate the date of the math paper 1 exam and the math paper 2. Put them on separate dates so that the students themselves can have a period of reflection, relaxation between the papers. And so to answer your question, what is being done to address math? Like I said, it has to be done in a very strategic and data-driven manner. We have received the data requested from the CXC. And so the team at the OECS Secretariat will be looking into strategies that can be employed to address this very vexing problem that we have in our schools.
All right, thank you, Mr. Minister. Vexing indeed. Let me now allow for those reporters, members of the media online who wish to ask their questions. We will ask that you identify yourself, so your name and your media house. And if you have a question, our moderator will then allow you to go. Any questions?
Yes, this is Robert Emmanuel from Observer News Co. I would have heard by the Minister, Dara Matthew, in relation to the establishment that you guys are looking at, the establishment of national student councils. Is that correct?
That is correct. In jurisdictions where they do not exist, they are being encouraged, and a decision was taken by the ministers to fast track the establishment of these student councils. We in Antigua and Barbuda do have already a mechanism in our legislation that provides for said councils to be established.
So what, can you just go more into the discussions that you guys have as to the importance of these national student councils?
Well, we believe that National Student Councils really puts a mechanism in place where students can be engaged in a meaningful level as it relates to issues surrounding interests or matters that affect them. We believe that it is really a focal point for student engagement. And I would dare say, garnering the ideas, the feedback, and the suggestions of our students in the decision-making process. Certainly for us here at the OECS level and at the Council of Ministers level, we believe that if we're going to be encouraging youth engagement and youth participation, particularly in our meetings, it is a good place from which we can garner that student rep. And we believe that in national development, it's important and critical that our young people be fully engaged. We listen to them, we hear from them, and we take on their ideas and suggestions to the extent that we can. And so it is really in our minds, certainly a no-brainer to encourage the establishment of these sort of organizations and entities.
Robert, any more questions?
Just one more. In relation to the youth-led discussion, I would be interested to know what were some of the suggestions that youth made to you guys as ministers.
Well, there weren't specific suggestions that were made. What we asked the youth for was their feedback on the different areas of the different topics that we were discussing. However, the areas of discussion. I can turn the microphone over to our colleague here, Sarah. Perhaps you can give some further insight as well to our media partners on the discussion from the youth leadership.
Thank you, Minister. And in response, the youth really did clamor for more engagement. Actually, they requested from Minister how they can better support the council of both the social ministers and education ministers. They called for an active voice in policy development. They called for reform in curriculum and assessment. And as Minister Matthews would have indicated, we have started on this work. They did call for active engagement with CXC itself, and they did profit this opportunity to indicate to CXC some of the reforms that they're hoping would be considered. At the heart of the youth's discussion and presentation was also the use of data to inform the quality of life. And I think that was a very, very important observation. The youth themselves saw that data, whether it's in the form of numbers or information, was critical. And so the youth platform, YouReport, this is a platform you could go on the web right now. We have over 5,000 youth right now, young persons who are very much engaged, discussing issues in education and other social aspects of development. So these were some of the critical themes coming from their contributions, and I hand over to you.
Robert, does that end your fleet of questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Robert. Robert Emmanuel there from Newsco Observer Limited right here in Antigua, Barbuda. Anyone else online with a question for any member of the panel this afternoon?
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, Annette Moore, Ministry of Education, Grenada. Anyone can answer. I just had a question as it relates to improving the performance in mathematics. Was there any discussion about how effectively we review culturally relevant content created by Caribbean authors in terms of adapting them for use in the classroom to help with the improvement of the improvement in performance in mathematics? For example, in 2020, one of our educators, Rachel Johnson, published along with Collins a math book titled CSEC Mathematics. And based on the review from teachers and educators, it was an excellent book, which they thought would really help to improve things in the classroom. Now, how does that relate back to CXC or the relevant bodies reviewing this for and saying, okay, we've found something good, maybe we can test this culturally relevant text throughout the Caribbean and see what happens. Of course, this is just one way in which you can address the problem, but was there any discussion about reviewing these texts by upcoming authors that may be a step in the right direction? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for this question. There was some discussion in relation to culturally relevant content. It's not only content in mathematics, but of course in reading. So for instance, OECS member states, through support under our Early Learners Program, we did engage with local writers. This included students, teachers, and the wider public. And to date, I am pleased to report that we have published 19 titles. These are content of authors from within the region. Now that is within the literacy early reading space, yeah? In recent times, we have developed content, culturally relevant and developmentally appropriate content through our digital education capacity strengthening initiative, DESI. And actually we closed off this project in Grenada just 2 weeks ago. And on that platform, we were able to develop some 1,500 units by teachers within the OECS and curriculum officers, lecturers for students with a specific focus in kindergarten to grade 3. And that included a large amount of content in mathematics. Now, in relation to textbooks, there is a process for textbooks, and this in most of our Education Act speaks to it. There is what is referred to as a textbook review committee. And so national within ministries of education, where they undertake review of textbooks and make recommendations on some of the key texts and also supplementary texts. Now, while we speak about textbooks and of course, issues like this are being dealt with, discussed at the national level, we are also cognizant that member states with the World Wide Web and with our recent, experiences of COVID, that culturally relevant, we appreciate it and we do want to move in that direction. There is definitely a space for it, but we're also taking a look at content that may be openly available. That is through open education resources. So to answer your question again, yes, culturally we do promote it, but it's beyond just mathematics. And secondly, textbooks in itself, this goes through a textbook review committee. So thanks, and actually thank you for sharing the example of referencing the author in Grenada. Thanks for that.
All right, thank you. Ms. Moore, any other questions from you out of Grenada?
Thank you. That's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for contributing. All right, we remain open and available for questions from our online partners.
If I may, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, I believe our colleague from St. Kitts and Nevis would like to make a brief statement.
Certainly.
Thank you very much, Chair. I am happy to, as the Chair indicated, that St. Kitts will be hosting the next meeting. I am happy that we are in a position that we will bring the OECS ministers and those in social development together. But I am pleased with the meeting that I attended, this being one of my first meeting, not only because of meeting the ministers, but the information that was shared in this 2 days and the networking that has been developed. I think it is one that I will remember. And I must say, as an educator myself, I was very much impressed with the young students who attended yesterday's sessions and the way how they were involved. that's a clear indication that the region, including Antigua, of course, is moving in the right direction in terms of ensuring that our young people continue to stay relevant and be a part of the decision making. So kudos to those, and especially again, in closing, those who performed at the opening ceremony. An excellent presentation by the girls from the, I think is the girls' high school. Excellent job.
Right, thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you for your vote of confidence as well. Anyone else online with further questions for our panel?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think I would like to put on record from the Ministry of Education in Anguilla our sincere gratitude to our chair, the Honorable Mr. Darrell Matthews, for an excellent session here at this Ministerial Council on Education. I believe it was a informative, thought-provoking, and very detailed session with the partnership of the OECS Commission and the EDMU. What I really want to state as something that left a lasting impression on me during our deliberations really was a section with our young people during Youth Speak. And there were a number of statements that were made by our youth representatives, which transcend across the region. Number one, I believe, was their push, not only for us to look at education in its siloed, but also in relation to the wider context with parents, the involvement of parents and other stakeholders, specifically as it relates to engaging in conversations about the earning potential of different fields outside of the traditional, looking at remote work, and also specifically in relation to the education sector, moving away from rote learning to conceptual learning, which is something that I know the EDMU and the OECS Commission has been focusing on. But I think it stands to reason that our young people are bringing this to the fore and asking us for urgent intervention in these particular areas. And I can see the commitment of the ministers of council across this region to ensure that we holistically reform and transform education in a way that benefits all the citizens of the OECS. And so from the Ministry of Education and from my perspective, it was a very successful meeting, well chaired, and I'm looking forward to the next meeting with our incoming chair and in St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. There's a question online before we go to other comments from the head table. A question is being asked concerning whether there's been any discussion about practical projects and vocational guidance during secondary education. Has there been any discussion about practical projects? I guess that's still aligned, the practical with the theory, and vocational guidance during secondary education.
Yes, thanks for that question. We did present a policy brief, an outline on some new strategies and approaches to assessments to ministers in caucus. And one of those recommendations is a shift to more project-based assessment, forms of assessments. And as minister in his introductory or report from the meeting highlighted, the shift, we are promoting more formative forms or authentic forms of assessment, and project-based learning. It's one of those, whereby students would have an opportunity to engage in more problem solving, teamwork, cooperative learning, where there is an opportunity for them to make an error and understand why, the why behind it, opportunities to be expressive and opportunities to really develop or to use their innovations and creativity. Oftentimes, as Minister discussed throughout the last 2 days, we seem to be testing just for testing's sake. We need to assign a score, we need to assign a grade. But have we really taken the time to ensure that students are really developing those life skills and those competencies? And so ministers did agree, and there was lots of discussions, even this morning at caucus, on how the region needs to take a look at this more closely. And so the OECS Commission, the ministers have tasked us with a responsibility to do some further deep dive on that area in the work that we have begun, and to, with a hope to developing a sort of roadmap, because we understand that even with some shifts in the approaches or the strategies for assessments, a lot of sensitization needs to be done. So in the coming months, you will be hearing, we will be putting out, we will be working a lot closer with the ministers, and certainly through the various ministries of education, definitely we will be planning some sort of engagements with the public to further develop the proposed ideas. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me as well ask a question just out of general interest. We talk about a potential move to AI, and then we talk about creativity. Was there any consensus on maybe the use of ChatGPT when we're talking about students and fostering their creativity, and but maybe perhaps not relying so much on artificial intelligence?
Thank you for that question. I think ChatGPT and artificial intelligence was a very spirited discussion that we had on day one of the ministerial caucus. And one thing that I was sharing with my ministerial colleagues was that we, and the chair really did endorse this perspective, that we really can't shy away from the use of ChatGPT and artificial intelligence within our education systems, because it's very clear that it's not going anywhere, and that we have to prepare our students to use it in the same way that we have become used to using tools such as Google and Wikipedia. But we have to learn how to leverage it at the same time as entrenching our critical competencies and skills like critical thinking across the education system. So we can't lose those essential skills. In fact, they become more important as we move to have these new intelligences and tools available to us. And one of the proposals made is that when we move forward with any artificial intelligence or the use of these AI tools, that we share them across the region so that we can actually engage in that experimental learning together as a region.
If I may add,
Yes,
Russell,
Mr. Minister.
in addition to what my colleague from Anguilla just said, I think this is where the importance of the OECS secretary comes into play as well, because we may each be having different experiences with the use of AI in our education system, and we may have different studies that we're carrying out in our individual countries. And so we ought not to be reinventing the wheel at all with this. So Anguilla may be having a study on the use of AI in secondary schools. We may be having a study on the use of AI at the University of the West Indies Five Islands campus, but sharing that information in a central repository called the OECS EDMU is what will make all of this beneficial to us in the long run. And so I just wanted to add that point, underscoring the importance of the OECS secretariat in this entire process.
Yes, thanks very much. I just wanted to add something within the general framework of cooperation and the value of the work of the OECS through the EDMU. Now, the issue of technology came up throughout our discussion. And what we basically agreed to is to ensure that we provide opportunities for us to engage the technology in enhancing our work and integration process. Now, if you take, for example, the very vexed question of mathematics, when we listened to the students, it was clear that many students felt that teaching was a major part of the problem why the performance of our students at mathematics was not at the acceptable level. We are saying we need not reinvent the wheel, that there are opportunities for us to share. Now, we might have within a particular country excellent maths teachers. Okay, a next country might not have the same endowment. Why can't we then use the technology to afford, say, a master teacher in mathematics in Antigua to record a series of lessons, and then we beam them, if you like, well, store them in the first place, and then retrieve them at a later date in any of our OECS countries, so that the students, respective to where they are, can benefit from that quality teaching. And although I use mathematics, it could be in any other subject. But the point is, in this case, you are using the framework of the OECS to deal with a problem that might be very challenging in your particular location, but through collaboration, you could deal with it. I thought that that was something very significant that came out. And finally, I wanted to make a general comment on the issue of the youth involvement. Now, let us not forget that our students are in fact a very important stakeholder in this process of our education. And they, especially in this period when we are talking about reimagining our education, when we are talking about making our education more relevant, well, what are we making that education more relevant for? Clearly, the stakeholders must be part of the process of helping to shape this education into what we want. And it can't be that other stakeholders should be involved. But one of the key grouping in terms of stakeholders, the students are not involved. And that is why we recognize the importance of having our students very much involved in the entire process. And certainly from an OECS level, we are moving beyond the talk and to put it into practice.
All right, thank you so much. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon again, colleagues, and good afternoon to all of our listeners and followers online. Let me first thank my colleague minister here from Antigua and the government and people of Antigua Barbuda for hosting us for this education summit. We were well hosted indeed, and so thank you and commendations to you and your team. And let me put on record to not just appreciation for you and your ministry and team, but for the OECS and the OECS Commission. I think the work that the OECS has done and continues to do in relation to education within the region is very outstanding, very remarkable. And we continue to have an organization championing the issues and the causes for us as a region. And we express sincerest commendations to you, the OECS. And if there's an example of an organization, an institution that models political Caribbean unity, I think it's the OECS. And so commendations to you. Now, in relation to the ministerial summit, the 2 days that we've spent, so many rich discourses were had. And I will not want to repeat all of the things that many of my colleagues have already said. In fact, I endorse them. But I particularly want to highlight two: having the youth involved and having them given a voice, that they were able to openly and candidly speak to us as ministers and speak to CXC and make their suggestions and inputs. I think that was very, very rich an element in this ministerial meeting. And our commitment to have them further included going forward as part of the delegations, I think is very, very commendable, and we look forward to that. One of the other takeaways was the ministers the Council of Ministers of Education's adoption of the Child Online Protection Policy Framework. Now, that is very important in this digital era where everything is online, everything is digital and virtual. The OECS has brought forward the Child Online Protection Framework, and the Council of Ministers approved that. And we know that there's going to be a lot more discussion with some of the child protection agencies around the region in various territories. But it was just outstanding to have the policy framework presented and to have our ministers adopt it. Additionally, some of the other things, the suggestions and the ideas that I think have been put into incubation stage at this very meeting that you might hear much more of, I think it excites me about continued collaboration with the OECS. Once again, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. We have another question online. We'll take our final question from our online partners.
Hello, good afternoon. Annette Moore again from Ministry of Education, Grenada. My final question is, were there any discussions with regard to improving outcomes in special education, particularly with respect to special education students with who have conditions like autism and so, who are placed within the mainstream school in terms of how we assess them and so forth? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annette, for your question from Grenada. While the issue of special education was not specifically addressed during this meeting, it was recognized that it is one of the areas within the education system that needs to be addressed. And so I can certainly commit that as chair of this group, during our quarterly meetings, it is one of the areas that will receive immediate priority in the first instance. And so again, it was not specifically a discussion topic over the last 2 days, but it certainly remains very high on the agenda of list of things to do. And so, yeah. And
Yeah, Minister, if I can add something that may be news to you. While we were in the meeting, the meeting was happening, I got a message that some people from the Antigua Disabilities Association wanted to meet with us. So we brought them in for a short while and had a discussion. But essentially the approach that would be taken by the OECS in that matter is to always encourage those civic organizations and specialized groups who focus on advocacy on these issues to represent themselves. And what we said to them was that we would organize for a Zoom meeting to be held between the disability associations of the OECS so that there could be a formal discussion on what proposals they want to make to governments, and then bring them in just as we brought in the students so that their ideas could be presented. It is a sacred responsibility for us in the OECS to listen to the voices of stakeholders, empower them to speak for themselves to the various ministerials so that ministers can hear from the sectors that are most deeply affected by the issues what their own recommendations are. We feel ultimately that is the power of collaboration, and that is how we will make real progress on action on those fronts.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on what the Director General had said, Chair, I think it also is worth mentioning that the OECS is still very much concerned about special education needs and the development of our frameworks around it, because they've been collating information through their special education needs survey, which most OECS member states have completed. And that directly from our SEN stakeholders will inform ministries and the OECS's position as it relates to the interventions and the development of the SEN education policy. So that's just to provide some perspective as to what's happening at this level.
All right. Thank you so much to our online partners for having joined this closing ceremony of the 8th OECS Council of Ministers. Right, one more minister wishes to speak. Yes, sir.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Those who are physically here and those on the online. Um, Montserrat is pleased to be participating in this very important council meeting. And in my mind, the function of a council really is to sit together and strategize on key issues that affect the region. And I think we have done justice to that over the 2 days. On the softer side of things, I really enjoy the hospitality. And I say thank you to our minister here in Antigua and Barbuda. The long time I have, well, as a matter of fact, I have been to Antigua. I'm coming to Antigua from since in the mid-80s, and I always get stuck in the traffic. It's the first time I'm coming to Antigua and driving from all the way St. James Club, no traffic at all. I really enjoy the protocol. So that would stick with me anyway. But just to not to really rehash most of what has been discussed, especially as it relates to the key issues. One of the things I just want to reiterate or highlight is surrounding the question that was asked about TVEC and projects. But I want to add here the issue of really delivering TVET in a particular way that drives entrepreneurship, meaning that our students involved in these areas should be in a position when they complete to find jobs for themselves. One of the things that we recognize that the governments in many of our OECS countries are the greatest employers. And so we want our students to be able, yes, learn the skills, but at the same time, coming out and becoming entrepreneurs, developing that business sense so that they can drive an economy where you have a strengthening and compounding private sector. So that is very, very important for me. And as I said, on top of the other things, you know, there are key issues, and we really, at this meeting, recommit ourselves to ensure that as member states and as ministries within the member states, that we really be the agents and the catalysts of driving these changes.
Thank you very much. I thought you were going to commend us on being the most hospitable we've ever been, but we'll accept the traffic flow as well as a compliment. No worries at all. All right, time for closing comments. We'll ask the incoming chair, the Honorable Darrell Matthew, Minister for Education here in Antigua Barbuda, to offer closing remarks, and then we'll have closing remarks from the Director General of the OECS, Dr. Delicus Jules.
Thank you once again, Ursula, and I'd like to thank all those persons who submitted or asked their questions directly to the panel here. You know, just in closing, I really want to reiterate how proud I am to have chaired this meeting over the past 2 days. I believe we touched on some very, very important topics, some of which were highlighted by my colleagues here to my left and my right. CXC, how do we coordinate better with CXC? How do we work along with the technology and not be intimidated by it? Artificial intelligence, applications such as ChatGPT. How do we find a way to incorporate them into our education system in a much more meaningful manner? How do we put policies in place to protect our children online, which is a big, big problem in many countries around the world? How do we be proactive, or how can we be proactive, beg your pardon, in protecting our children online and putting policies in place to ensure that they are indeed protected? How do we work with our young people to foster greater collaboration with them, to listen to them? My brother from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Minister King, asked the rhetorical question: how can you possibly be putting systems and policies in place for a particular stakeholder group without having engaged them? And so I think one of the big things coming out of this, this council meeting over the past 2 days is really a renewed focus on youth engagement, a renewed focus on youth interaction, and certainly a renewed focus on getting the perspective of the youth and those very critical stakeholders who they are as a part of policy and decision making. And so I want to thank my colleagues for really being the excellent group that you were over the past 2 days, for sharing your ideas and for being very cooperative as well, for being very, very patient. I know there was at one point on Monday or so, this meeting was 3 hours behind schedule, given the extent of the engagement, particularly from our young stakeholders. But at no point did anyone complain. In fact, we actively encouraged them to keep talking, keep engaging, keep letting us know exactly how you feel. And coming out of that engagement, the ministers, as was mentioned, took a decision that we wish to institutionalize having a youth delegate as a part of national delegations going to these meetings. And so again, thank you for being a part of what I believe was a very exciting and insightful 2 days. And I look forward to meeting you colleagues in our virtual quarterly meetings, and certainly in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis next year. We look forward all to all being there. So thank you very much, colleagues. And I'll now turn the chair, or the microphone, I should say, over to DG Didicus Jules for his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair. 5 points of closure. First, the question of student engagement, I think, has been adequately ventilated in this press conference. But let me say that the intention is not to stop at student engagement in future meetings of the ministers of the Council of Ministers of Education. The issue of teacher engagement is going to be very important too. And we are going to be working to ensure that all stakeholders in education get an opportunity to have their voices heard by the ministers, to make recommendations and share, provide proposals for the improvement. We are very clear that changing education at this point in time is not solely a government responsibility. It is a whole of society responsibility, given the deficits of learning that have occurred from all the crises that we've been through. Related to that, so parental involvement as well in wherever there are parental organizations. And for us in the OECS, we are going to leverage technology to the best of our ability to ensure that as many voices come through that pipeline as possible to ministers. Reference was made to U-Report. The intention is to ensure that every young person in the OECS, everyone, we have 5,500 young people from 12 OECS member states now on U-Report. The intention is to have all of that demographic on U-Report, which gives us a very powerful tool to do short-term, in short-term skills training using the mobile phones with U-Report, as well as do quick quizzes to pulse the feelings of that, or the ideas of that demographic in real time. So we're going to be using U-Report for that, and also to draw on the different constituencies. The third point of closure is the issue of pedagogy. How to make learning fun. That has been an underlying part of the discourse of the ministers, and there's a lot that we are already doing in terms of systematic teacher training. Thousands of teachers have been trained in a lot of the new products that have been developed through the OECS. And when I say the OECS, member states working with us. But we will be focusing more and more on how can we change the way in which we teach, because that will impact the way students learn. And we heard clearly from the student voices who were present that one of the reasons why mathematics is so difficult is because it's boring and is not being applied. So the application of knowledge, learning through doing, is going to be a very important part of the way forward. The fourth point is on educational advancement, not being simply a high-tech thing. I know there's a fascination in the media now. You hear how many questions were asked about chat GPT and the technologies, the use of the internet and online learning, etc. But let's be clear that educational development in the Caribbean does not reside solely on taking expensive high-tech approaches. There is no-tech, low-tech, and high-tech. And we need to also focus on the no-tech, as in the pedagogy, simple things that can be done. Minister from Montserrat was in the course of the dialogue explaining in a geography lesson, for example, why do we have to sit in a classroom and talk about geography? Take students on a field trip in Montserrat, in Antigua, in St. Vincent, to see the topography, the geography of the country. Let them explore it, let them draw it, let them create games and puzzles using these things. And all of that can come back to us, the best practices in that, as a repository of material that could be used in all of the islands for boosting learning. Lastly, I want to thank again Minister Darrell for his leadership, following on the excellent tradition of his predecessor, our minister from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and to all of the ministers for their very active participation in this. To all of the development partners who were present and who also played an active role in the deliberations, and most importantly, to their commitment to the solutions that we have defined for the immediate future. Thank you very much.
And thank you as well. Thank you to Minister Matthew and to Director General Dr. Jules. And thank you to all the members of the panel this afternoon who shared your thoughts with the proceedings over the last 2 days. It was a pleasure to have hosted you right here in Antigua Barbuda. I'm sure the Honorable Minister would have expressed our gratitude as well. Thank you for choosing our Twin Island state. I want to thank those members of the OECS Council, those members of the permanent secretaries, education officials who also gathered to lend their voices and to the young people as well. I want to say that it has been a pleasure again hosting you. This will officially mark the end of this 8th OECS Council of Ministers on Education. I dare say those were that we all look forward to, on top of crafting the policies, that will implement them and that will have a very collaborative approach to ensuring that education, the mandate is really fulfilled across the OECS. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ursula Charles Jr. This marks the end of the council meetings, and this marks the end of the press conference today. Thank you so much.